Good morning. Glad you're tuning in with us again this morning. If you are, hopefully and thankfully, maybe last week we had to do this as we're planning on getting back together next week, which is looking forward to seeing you all here next week back with us. Kind of return to a little bit of normalcy as much as possible. We're thankful for that. Exodus chapter 14 is where we're going to be at today. We will start in verse number 19. As we started last week, this lesson on God proving or showing that He is the leader. And we're seeing Him lead the nation of Israel. The first 2 points last week we had, He led them with, first of all, with wisdom and with purpose, leading them with wisdom around essentially some of their enemies because they were not ready for a fight yet. And then leading them with purpose to a place where they're pretty much trapped in their eyes between the wilderness and the Red Sea. And as we left the Israelites last week, the Egyptians with 600 of the best men in chariots that Pharaoh has at his disposal are bearing down on the Israelites. They are feeling as if they're trapped between the Red Sea and the wilderness and the Egyptian army bearing down on them. We see them turning on Moses, complaining, questioning why they were where they were, and we see God in the huge cloud that He has been leading them with by day, and of course the pillar of fire by night. We see that cloud move out onto the Red Sea, and Moses, understanding God wanted them to do something, but not quite fully grasping what God had in store or had in plan. And as we're going to see today, we see that God is going to lead His people with wisdom and purpose like last week, but with power today. Protective power, providing power that He displayed and shows here in just a second as He parts the Red Sea and allows the Israelites, to walk across. But before we get into that, though, let's open up the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for another day, Lord, where we can meet in the way that we're meeting. Not here in the church together, Lord, but in churches meeting together in spirit and tuning in to our live stream, Lord. And again, we've mentioned this each week. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have, which you blessed us with here, the camera and the service, Lord, and the ability to be able to live stream so that we can still have church in this different way, Lord. We're thankful. Thank you for it. Thank you for the ones who have been so faithful to tune on in each week and sit down on the couch or wherever they're at and drink a cup of coffee and probably still in their PJs, but kick on the TV or the computer or whatever it is and tune in with us, Lord. So we're thankful for them. Lord, we pray for each one of them this morning, for the requests they have, for the concerns they have. We pray that you just meet each one of those needs. Some appointments and things coming up and in certain times and just all kind of stuff going on. This concern over this virus and other things as well, the health needs that we have, and just pray that you just continue to be with each one of them, Lord. You continue to meet the needs of your people. And we know, Lord, you're in control and you're guiding over them with watch, care, and protection. We pray that you continue to do so. We know the petitions are being heard and you're working and moving in each one of those situations as well, and thank you for that. Thank you for knowing those things already. Thank you for being sovereign and knowing exactly what we need, the wisdom and guidance that you have and give us to oftentimes as we don't understand. Maybe in the middle of stuff, as we see the Israelites today, we know that you're in control and we thank you for it. And Lord, sometimes there's uncertainty ahead and you're wanting us just to step forward so that you can show your power and display your might. So Lord, I pray that you give us the boldness and the understanding that although it may be cloudy to us or it may be thick, full of trees, you're overseeing all of it. So Lord, as you look at our lesson today and consider the times ahead of us, Lord, let us remember that you are truly in control. Thank you for each one that are, again, Lord, that are listening, Lord. Thank you for the request, Lord. I thank our missionaries this morning as well. Out in the field, in different places, serving you. Pray you continue to meet the needs they have, Lord. And as we get to have church next Sunday, Lord, and going forward into the summertime, Lord, pray that you continue to be with us, Lord. Continue to watch and protect us, Lord. Pray Pastor Robbie comes in next little bit and with our lesson today as well. And I pray. Amen. So again, Exodus chapter 14, verse number 19, we see kind of the building of this scene here of the Israelites bearing down and the horses' noses blaring and the dust flying and Pharaoh screaming in the back and the spears raised and the Israelites cowering there, worried and concerned what's going to happen. Moses standing there on the banks of the Red Sea, and we see God again showing that he is the leader by looking at verses 19 and verse 20, and we see God leading the Israelites with, first of all, protective power. Verse 19 and 20. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of the Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to those. It gave light by night to these, so that one came not near the other all night long. So we see the first beginning here of God's protective power over the Israelites. We see the angel of God, who has been obviously with them now as they're traveling. We see the angel of God moving to a position of defense. Now, I looked up. There's a whole different bunch of ideas on who this angel of God could have been. Could have been one of the other angels that we see throughout scriptures that's used. Could have just been one of God's angels that he commanded to be in charge of the defense, whatever the case may be. But regardless of which angel it was, or if it was, or just the presence of God, or whatever the case may be, we see though that it was there and had been there with them as they were traveling, and it was had been a defense, not a defense mechanism, but a means of defense for the Israelites as they were traveling. So we see this angel of God moving into a position of defense. And again, most likely the divine angel of the Lord. And we see God moving in a way here that shows Israel that not only was he leading them, but he also had their back, right? He also had their back and was going to be in control of their protection as well. When God moved to behind the Israelites, as we saw there in verse 20, he provided them with light to see through the night. Okay? So God's light here illuminates the path for the Israelites in that the sense that the pillar of fire was leading the Israelites in the directions and showing them where to go. But while that's going on, at the exact same time, God causes the pillar of the cloud, so the pillar of the light's there, the pillar of the cloud is there, to block out all of the light for the Egyptians, right? So this cloud that kind of, the pillar is there, is causing this blanket of darkness on the Egyptians to a point where they couldn't see anything, okay? Even if they had wanted to engage with the Israelites in some type of fight, or if they wanted to move in on them and close the position anyway, they couldn't have, because they couldn't see anything, all right? Now, around the Israelite camp, inside of it, there would have been this bubble that there would have been light. On the outside of that, there would have been no light, and God is allowing that to take place. In the moment that happened, right? Just 3 or 4 verses ago, the Israelites were saying, we should have stayed in Egypt. We won't die in the wilderness if we were in Egypt. Or why did God bring us here? And so on and so forth. It's a matter of a few minutes when this whole miracle, is what it was, takes place. What should the people have said to God once he moved to protect them, right? This protection that sheds the light on them. What should the people have done? Or what should their response have been? And of course, it should have been asking for forgiveness on the spot, right? Asking for forgiveness on the spot for not trusting in God, for not trusting in his power and his ability to take care of them, even in these what seem to be hopeless and bleak circumstances. Okay, so we see first of all God leading with power, protective power. Get down to verse 21, and we see God's providing power as well. We're going to read all the way down to verse 31. So verse 21 down to 31, through the rest of the chapter, we see God's providing power. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind, with a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto the left on the right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon the chariots, and upon the horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remaineth not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto the right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians die upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord in his servants. So we see now the providing power. See God using a strong east wind to part this Red Sea. Moses stretches out his hand, this east wind comes in, and it essentially just opens up the Red Sea like you'd open up a book. Okay? There was a wall of water on both sides of the Israelites as they passed through the sea. Now, I know we've all heard this story in this account, and probably in our minds thought about what this would have been like had you have been one of the Israelites. Now, the Red Sea is deep, really deep. It's not just like 8 or 10 feet deep. It's several feet deep. So with this wall of water that would have been on both sides of the Israelite multitude as they were walking across would have been very, 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 very high. And they would have looked up and only seen water on the left and on the right. As a matter of fact, I would imagine some of the kids were able to stick their hands into the water as they walked on both sides. They probably ran their hands along one of the sides of it. And it didn't move. It was there. It stayed right there the entire time. And of course, we know the saying of, even if you move the water or the ground, of course, we know at the bottom of any type of water at all, it's soft and mushy and wouldn't be able to walk on it. And all those people carrying all that stuff would have been stuck. But not only was the water on both sides in a wall, but there was perfectly dry ground for them to walk on as well. So he dried up the seafloor, making it easier for them to travel swiftly through the night. Now, how amazing this would have been to see God's power on display all around them. Now, I remember The Prince of Egypt, one of the old cartoon movie that came out in the 90s. I remember watching it, and one of the things they depicted that at the time I didn't think about would probably for surely happen. As they were walking across this, they would see the shadows of fish swimming on the sides. Sure it happened, right? I'm sure there were shadows of turtles or whatever, the fish that were swimming around. They probably could have looked over and seen these things, or the shadow as they had their, the light that was in front of them casting a shadow. I'm sure you would have seen those things swimming around. Maybe fish were jumping over top of them as they were walking across. Who knows, right? All these things could have very easily happened, and it would have been amazing to see this thing kind of take place. It would have been amazing for the Israelites to see God's power on display all around them. Not only was the splitting of the water impressive enough, when you step down expecting some mud and some muck, and it's like walking on sand or any just type of dry ground at all. And then the fact that the water stayed there the entire time, the stuff that would have been going on, it would have been amazing to be able to be witness to. But again, just God showing his providing power. Now, we saw it there in verse 21 and verse 22. Now, Pharaoh directs his army to take the exact same path that the Israelites had taken. Okay? So, not only were the Israelites exposed to the power of God, but Pharaoh and those Egyptians saw this as well, right? They would have seen the wall of water on both sides and this path down the middle of the Red Sea. And he instructs his army, instructs the people who are with him, to take the exact same path that the Israelites had taken. And as his army on the ground as well was right in between the sea walls, chasing after the Israelites, God looked down on him through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and then he caused the ground, first of all, to no longer be dry. Right? We see that verses 23, 24, and 25. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all of Pharaoh's and his Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that the morning watch, that the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels. So the ground that was dry, and the ground that was previously dry as the Egyptians were traveling on it, right? It was dry for a while. God looks back, sees them, and essentially causes that ground to become just as wet as it was if the water was on top of it. That, of course, would cause those big, heavy chariots, those horses who are trying to pull those chariots, that's going to bog everything down. And they're stuck. And you can imagine the whinnying or the neighing of the horses as they're trying to pull, the cracks of the whips, they're trying to get those horses to pull, the men jumping off, trying to push those chariots, and that ground just being so soaked that they're just stuck in it and probably sinking down it farther and farther and farther and farther down. So those chariots and all the things they were using became absolutely and entirely useless. Now, if you go over to Psalms with me in chapter 77, there's some more details here about this attack that God is going to display on the Egyptians here. So go over to Psalms 77, please, and go to Psalms chapter 77, and go to verse 16. Psalm 77, 16 down through 19. We see some other stuff. So first of all, the ground becomes wet again, saturated. The horses, the chariots are all stuck. The water saw thee, O God, the water saw thee. They were afraid, and the depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heavens. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. So while the Egyptians are trying to get their chariots unstuck, then God brings in this massive thunderstorm. There's heavy rain, there's thunder, there's lightning, and there's even an earthquake. So if these Egyptians weren't already panicked enough, they've got this wall of water on both sides that the moment they realize, the moment this thing lets loose, it's going to completely cover us and kill us. The ground's wet, they can't move. There's a thunderstorm that's coming in, rain and thunder and lightning. The earth then begins to shake as well. And you get to verse 25, we see what the Egyptians do. And took off their chariot wheels and drove the Egyptians and took off the chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily. So the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord frightened them against the Egyptians. So they realized the severity of their situation, and they try to run back towards Egypt. They completely abandon here the pursuit of the Israelites. Now we see verses 26 down through 27, God's response to that. Right? God's not going to let the Egyptian army get away. So once all of the Israelites, I think this is a great multitude of people, are safely across, standing there on the shore of the sea, God gives instructions. Verse 26 to Moses, and tells him to stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon the chariots, and upon their horsemen. Okay, so God instructs Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. Now, when the first light of dawn appeared, the sea returned to its normal depth. Okay? In verse 27, and Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. When did the Egyptians pursue the Israelites? What time of day was it? It was at night, right? We saw them go in after them at night. So were the Egyptians trying to get out of the middle of the ground all night long? Yes, there was a time where the Egyptians were there and they were trying to get out. This didn't all just, they come in, get stuck, and the waters come down. This didn't all happen all at one time. They were stuck there for a period of time trying to get out. They could not get out, all right? And then when the morning breaks, as soon as the sun rises, the first light comes up, that's when Moses stretches out forth his hand, and we see the Red Sea collapsing back down upon the Egyptians. So all night, maybe not all night long, but for a period of time, time, Pharaoh and the horses and the horsemen and the Egyptians were there, stuck just waiting for, or hoping that this water didn't let loose, or hoping they could try to get out, fighting their way back out of off the bottom of the Red Sea, and they could not do that, right? God would not let them get away. Pharaoh's army, of course, when the first dawn of light appeared, Pharaoh's armies, of course, would be crushed under the tremendous speed and the weight of the water rushing back to fill the valley God had created in the sea. We all know water is the most powerful force on the earth, right? Think of what the topography of the earth looked like after the flood. Grand Canyon, mountains being pushed up. There's water will cut pretty much into anything given enough time, and it will do it pretty quickly. You can imagine the force with which this 25, 35, 45, 55, 65 foot of water on both sides, the kind of force that would have caused as it compacts down together and covers up and kills all of Pharaoh's army. Get to verse 30 and 31. And this obviously is going to have an effect on the Israelites. It's going to have effect on the little ones all the way up to the old ones that witness this happen. On the seashore, they see the water rush. They hear it rush. They hear it smack together. And what they probably heard all night, the Egyptians trying to get horses and all that stuff they would have heard, it just went silent with the rush of water. And obviously it would have had quite the effect on them. Verse 30, thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So this event that has taken place allowed these, changed, I guess, or refocused the Israelites where they feared the Lord and believed both him and Moses. Israel here had all the reasons they would now need to have confidence in the Lord and the leader Moses. Crossing of the Red Sea became one of the most referred to events in Israel's history. God uses it and has used it as a benchmark for his relationship with Israel. It's no wonder that Moses and the Israelites spent time capturing that event in the form of a song. And that song reveals the truths that they learned about from God that day. Now, there's, of course, there wasn't long ago, you can probably still find it, a lot of stuff's probably taken down, but there was people who had, or scientists, biblical archaeologists who had been down to the bottom of the Red Sea and had seen the debris of chariots and seen the debris of different things. I don't think people in the area will allow you to get down there now because they don't. It's probably either gone or they don't. It's been covered up. They don't want you to cover it up with other soot and stuff. They don't want you down there to kind of help add to the people seeing that. But you can on the internet right now, you can find pictures of the chariots and different things that were at the bottom of the Red Sea. I actually looked up a couple of those this week just to kind of help prove that this actually did take place. But we see God showing his power again over the Egyptians and showing the power to the Israelites. And that brings us into chapter 15. And we see two truths here. Before we get to chapter 15, what are two truths about God's might that you would put into a song about his deliverance of Israel from the Egyptians if you were one of the Israelites here that heard this? Now, this chapter 15 here is this song that they put into because it had such an impact on them. Of course, we see Israel learning that God is strong, he's unmatched, he's able to carry out his promises, and because of this whole event, they burst forth into a song of praise. And that's what chapter 15 is about all the way down through it. And we won't jump into that this week because we don't have time. But we see there's a couple of parts to this song that we'll get into next week that is essentially lessons that Israel learned about God, kind of a culmination of all the things that they have seen now, from them plagues, him delivering them out of Egypt, to him providing for them with the crossing of the Red Sea. And we will get more into that song next week. But on the sea banks here that we see, let's look at verse 1 at least. You can kind of see exactly what's happening here. On the sea banks, after this has happened, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. And then it goes on and on and on there about a few more things there. We're going to see next week of what Israel learned about God. He's strong and unmatched. He's able to fulfill his promises and a few other things as well. So that is the crossing of the Red Sea, one of the most famous stories in the Bible, one that has been scrutinized and talked about a whole lot. But again, it just shows God's sovereignty and his power, and proving to the people here of Israel that he is in fact their leader. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson that we have. Thank you for being able to take this depiction and this event in history that happened. First of all, we can study it and look at it and see exactly what you did and how your power was displayed. But then we also, the physical evidence of it as well, that just helps prove further the ability that you have. Power over nature, power over everything, and how, as children of you, we have access to that power through you. We're thankful for it. We're thankful for your redeeming qualities. We're thankful for your leading qualities. Lord, I pray it's our desire that we continue to be faithful to our relationship with you. Step forward even through the midst of a difficult time. Walk on that dry land, even though we're not sure that it's dry. Expect the waters to hold back because you put them there. Walk through the middle of the storm, even through uncertainty, but know that you're in control and that the reward and the blessing is on the other end of it. The lesson, whatever it may be. So we thank you for having concern for us, a God who has the ability to pull back the waters of the Red Sea, to make the land dry, and to turn it back wet almost instantly. You have concern for us. And you want to get to know us. And you want to have an intimate relationship with us. Lord, it never ceases to amaze me. It never ceases to absolutely blow my mind. That I'm just less than we are less than the small speck in the great grand scheme of things. But you hold that small speck in your hands. I want to watch for it and take care of it. Lord, we love you. Thank you so much for what you do for us. Thank you for your son. Thank you for the sacrifice that he gave for us as well. We pray for Pastor Rob as he comes in the next few minutes, that you would use him in a mighty way this morning as well. We're looking forward to we can get back together next week with our church family, being able to worship and fellowship together near our prayer. Amen.